What the Falcons do? Rise up. Welcome to Rise Up Reactions, the show where we talk all things Falcons, NFL, Georgia sports, and in general the sports news of the day. I'm your host, Dr. Lee Denning, fantasy football enthusiast. So today I wanted to just take a couple of minutes to talk about fantasy football a little bit. We are all, those of us who love fantasy football, gearing up for the 2022 fantasy season. Those of us who are in Dynasty leagues are furiously looking to evaluate rookie prospects and see what kind of deals can be made going into the season. For those of you who are unaware, there are things called Dynasty leagues, and then there are redraft leagues. Redrafts are where you pick a new team every single year. You do not keep players more or less from year to year, with the exception of maybe a couple of guys. Whereas Dynasty, you are the manager of a team going forward. Once you draft that player, he's on your team till you cut him or trade him. I've been in one for a few years now where I have the same roster every single year, more or less, and make adjustments as needed. There are a lot of different variants to this, including some which have like a salary restriction arbitrarily assigned to certain players or to owners to try and make it mimic the NFL. That would be like one that I am involved in. Some of them say you can only keep 5 or 6 players on your roster from year to year, and then you have to get rid of everybody else and have a redraft for the rest of it. But again, a lot of different varieties to that, and then there's a lot of different flavors to redraft leagues as well. Some of them are auction leagues where you actually bid on players to build your team, and you can make the roster however you want it as long as you have the money to do it. And then there are just traditional redraft leagues where you do a snake draft where you go 1 through 12, 12 through 1 every couple of rounds. Until you fill out your entire roster, and then you have free agents afterwards. So today I wanted to talk a little bit about fantasy football etiquette in 3 different categories. The first being in and surrounding the draft, then in season, and then finally kind of some more specific things for Dynasty. And just to kind of talk about them today, because we're kind of gearing up for that season, and I've noticed that I don't always follow these, and I feel like I should do a little bit better. And then there are definitely people that I've been involved with in the past who have not followed traditional etiquette and have made the fantasy football experience a much less fun experience than what it's meant to be. So right around the draft, there's a few things that I think are important pertaining to the draft. You need to be on time to your draft. Your commissioner needs to let you know ahead of time, at least a couple of weeks if possible, when your draft is going to be. You know when it's going to be, unless you just absolutely know you can't be there and you're going to have to auto draft, which happens. It's hard to coordinate 10 to 14 people having the same schedule or having a time where everybody can get together. You try to do it when most people can do it, but it is tough. Having been a commissioner for leagues the last few years, that's not always conducive to everybody's schedule, especially when you start adding in different time zones as well. It gets really, really tough. But if you know when your draft is, you should be on time, you should be present. It really gets annoying to have to wait for certain programs to kick in and knock you on to auto draft instead. So it basically makes you go through an entire 60 to 90 second block of time every time you're up on the clock, and it just really prolongs the draft. The other thing for commissioners, you need to be available for people who are having difficulties and try to address it as best as possible during the draft. Not just by text. If you are a text-only commissioner, you're doing a piss-poor job. You need to be available by phone because sometimes the issue needs to have somebody available to talk to. You need to be some kind of tech support that's not just sending text messages every 30 seconds to try and address an issue. Literally be available by phone. If you're not going to do that, don't be a commissioner. The other thing is for players, don't delay in your picks. It's understandable. You do have basically a shot clock on a lot of these drafts, but don't delay. If you already know what your team needs, you can make a decision between a couple of players, and you may have to go 30 or 40 seconds into your minute time slot, which most of them have, but be ready. You know when you're coming up. You can see what's available. Look and have some guys ready that you want to take or have some idea about based on what everybody around you has done. When you are about 5 spots away, you should have 5 or 6 players ready to go that you would want to draft if they're still available. So that's a big thing in draft, and all of those things will slow down a draft if there's an issue. Getting through a draft as quickly and efficiently as possible is the big thing on draft day. Anything that delays it is a breach in etiquette. Moving on to some in-season rules. This is for commissioners. There should be no mid-season rule changes unless it is absolutely necessary. Anything that could change the outcome of the league based on a rule change added in the middle should be frowned upon. Start with whatever you're going to start with and write it out. Even if it's terrible, write it out through the season, change it next year. But try not to do things mid-season if possible. Early in the season, maybe the first 3 or 4 weeks, you can get away with that. But again, playoffs start about week 14 or 15 for most people. I guess it's week 15 now that they've added 17 games to the NFL. So you're already, if you do it any time past about that fourth week, you have already had a quarter of the season go by, and that's too much time elapsed to actually allow people to make adjustments as necessary for the new rule changes. So the next thing, this is big. Do not abandon your team. Even if you're terrible, somebody's got to be bad. Not everybody's going to be good. You're going to make some decisions in the draft and in free agency that just don't work out. Don't abandon your team. Play hard, make acquisitions, make trades, do what you got to do. Try and be competitive no matter what. And one of the other things that goes along with this, fill your roster every single week. There is no excuse for you to have a player on bye in your active roster at any point in the season whatsoever. No excuse. The only reason that I could see anybody having an inactive player is if you were really hoping that somebody who was on the injury report was going to play. You needed them to have the best upside, and then they don't, and it's too late in the day to change it. That's understandable. But having a player on bye in your active roster, it just it's screwing with the competitive aspect of it. You are providing somebody more or less probably an easy win over you because you're going to have less guys going up against them. So it's just not fair to everybody else in the league. The other thing that goes along with this, no collusion. What is collusion? That is where two owners or more owners get together and they basically make a deal or have some underlying understanding that they are going to tank or they're going to do something that will make the league less competitive. So they might put in their B squad against somebody to give them another win or try and help them out in some way. Or more likely, they make a really, really bad trade. So just to put that in perspective, let's just say this year's #1 overall prospect is Jonathan Taylor. So somebody tries to trade, let's say, Jonathan Taylor for, I don't know, Marquise Goodwin. Straight up. No additional players whatsoever. That is a clear area of collusion. Somebody is getting way better, somebody's getting way worse. Even if you are already knocked out of the playoffs, do not offload your good players to teams that are either fringe playoff or are going to be really, really good. That is just absolutely destroying the competitive aspect of the league. Do not do that. Ride and die with your team. Make adjustments as you can, but ride and die with these guys. The other thing that goes on is if you are in a position where you can veto a trade, there should basically be no vetoes to trades whatsoever unless there's conclusion. It doesn't matter if you like the person, if you don't like the person, if you are in full agreement with the trade. If it makes one team better in an area and makes another team better in some other area and there's not obvious collusion, you should not veto it. Doesn't matter if it helps you, hurts you, whatever. Don't veto trades unless there's obvious collusion. Once the playoffs are locked, this is the only time where I say the competitive aspect goes out for teams that don't make the playoffs. If there's no prize, there's no benefit whatsoever in the consolation ladder, then don't be making free agent moves. Don't be doing waiver wire moves. Don't be taking players that, the guys who are really competing for the #1 overall at that point could take. Now, if there's a prize for the consolation ladder, okay, I have no problem with it at that point. That makes a lot of sense. If there's something affecting maybe the draft order for the next year, depending on how well you finish in that ladder, then go for it. It makes a lot of sense. But once you're knocked out where there's no more benefit, stop picking up players. That's the only time I'm okay with you somewhat abandoning your roster. But if there's something to play for, if there's draft positioning, if there's anything like that, don't abandon. Just keep with it. Play for the next year. And then finally, in regards to trades, respond to trades in a timely manner. This is a weekly game once you start the season. Respond to trades quickly. There should not be an owner waiting more than probably 36 hours to hear back on a trade. And really, 24 is more than enough. The other thing that happens is with owners, if you are making a trade to multiple people, you need to be upfront and say, hey, this is a time-sensitive thing. I am talking to person A and I'm talking to person B and I'm talking to you. Whoever makes that deal first, they're gonna, that's who I'm gonna go with. But you need to be transparent in if you're talking to other owners, so that there is a perceived time limit to your trade, so that people don't think they just have multiple times or a lot of time to think about it. It just, again, you're potentially messing with somebody who's trying to make other moves to accommodate you, and just let them know where they stand right out the gate. And again, I have been guilty of a large number of these crimes against fantasy. But I've tried to learn from them over the years, and I've tried to do better with it. But again, life gets busy. We understand, but try your best to be understanding and to be timely in responding to things. The last little set of things are more pertaining to Dynasty. Dynasty, again, very special format here. I would say, the biggest one here, as a Dynasty owner, you are available all year long. The Dynasty season doesn't end at the Super Bowl for the team. You continue on going forward. There may be an off season where your commissioner says, okay, no trades, no roster additions, anything like that, but you should still be available well before your team's draft or your league's draft, to be available for trades, talks, anything like that. The next thing would be, try to have most of your deals done pre-draft. If you're trying to jockey for draft position, do that well ahead of the draft. Don't be making crazy last-minute moves if you can help it, unless there's just some valid reason. Now, if something happens closer to the draft that would affect you and you want to try and jockey for position there, perfect. But make your deals and be done by the time of the draft. Don't do anything that delays or holds the draft up. Some drafts are really complicated. You should know your general rules ahead of time, especially if you've been in the league for a long time. And then you should have an idea of the players and strategy that you want to take for your specific league, again, well ahead of time. You know who's available. You can look at everybody else's roster ahead of time. You know what players are going to be there. You know how your league works. You should be ready to make picks more or less at the time of the draft. Now, granted, depending on how complicated you get, which like my league has like basically 3 different types of drafts for one single league, it gets complicated once players are taken off the board and categories are removed for players that you can even draft from. That gets complicated, and as it goes on, yeah, you definitely are going to have to delay that a little bit or change your plan. But you should more or less know what you need. You should know roughly the guys you want to target to get there. And if you got to make a change on the fly, make the change on the fly. But otherwise, be respectful and push forward as quickly as you can. The final thing would be to make league payments on time. This is not just a Dynasty thing. This is for everybody. I have been guilty of this before, but having been a commissioner as well, it is incredibly frustrating to have to beg and plead to get people to get your money. I've actually had to make rules in the past where if you haven't paid by a certain time frame, you don't get to make the playoffs. It doesn't matter how well you finish, you just don't get to make the playoffs. So don't do that. Don't make your commissioner have to work for it. Pay them on time. If you agree to be in the league and there's a league fee, pay it. You agreed to it. Doesn't matter if anything else. Get them the money that you owe them. It's like having a debt that you got to pay. But otherwise, again, this has been, I feel like this has been a fairly negative video, but these are just things that are really annoying for those of us who play fantasy when we come up against them. So the biggest thing here, biggest takeaway, be respectful of all the other guys in your league. Make trades in a timely manner. Make your picks in a timely manner. And just be a present owner. That's the biggest takeaways from his. But until next time, let me know what you think down in the comments below. If you agree with me, if you have any other things you think should be added to Fantasy Etiquette. If you like the video, consider liking it and subscribing. It'll help us out a lot. But until next time, guys, rise up.